Iran has just moved from warnings to a direct military claim. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says it has launched ballistic missiles at one of Israel's most important Air Force facilities, Ramat David Air Base in northern Israel. The claim was carried by Tasnim, a semi-official Iranian news agency, and it marks what Tehran describes as part of its latest wave of retaliatory strikes. Ramat David sits roughly 20 kilometers from Haifa and is considered one of Israel's major military aviation hubs. Much of what follows comes from Iranian state-linked outlets rather than from major wires directly, and Israeli authorities have not commented on the specific claim. But explosions were reported in the Haifa area, the sirens were real, and Iran is now naming the exact base it says it hit. And the choice of target carries a message. Iran said it selected Ramat David specifically because it was allegedly the source of the operations carried out against southern Lebanon and Beirut's southern suburbs in recent weeks. The IRGC described the strike as a direct response to what it called Israeli aggression in Lebanon. In other words, Tehran is not claiming a random strike on Israeli territory. It is claiming a strike on the exact facility it blames for the bombing of Beirut, framing the attack as targeted retaliation rather than blind escalation. The strike follows what Iranian and regional channels described as a fifth wave of missile launches toward Israeli territory, with air raid sirens sounding across the north and explosions reported near Haifa. Regional reports also suggested Hezbollah may be involved in the latest round, opening the possibility of a coordinated front. Iran has just launched what is being described as the fifth wave of ballistic missile attacks against Israel. Reports circulating through regional media and monitoring channels say multiple ballistic missiles were fired from Iranian territory toward Israel, triggering fresh security alerts across the country and raising fears of a much wider regional escalation. This is not an isolated launch. It follows hours of heightened tension and a series of earlier exchanges between the two sides. Much of what follows is drawn from Iranian and regional channels and flight tracking monitors rather than from major wire services directly, and should be read with that sourcing in mind. But the sirens are confirmed, the alerts are official, and the pattern points in one direction. The retaliation Tehran promised after Israel struck Beirut is now arriving in waves, and Iran is no longer firing alone. Separate reports claim that Hezbollah has joined the latest round of attacks, opening a second front from the north at the same moment Iranian missiles are inbound. Israeli media channels are reporting that preparations are underway to close Ben Gurion International Airport and tighten restrictions on Israeli airspace, though no official announcement confirming a full closure had been issued at the time of reporting. Sirens are sounding across northern Israel. According to the Israeli Home Front Command, air raid alerts were activated around Haifa after missiles were detected heading toward Israeli territory. Reports carried by Al Jazeera and RN Intel claim 4 missiles were launched toward Haifa as Israeli air defense systems responded. When the largest airport in the country is preparing to shut its doors and the resistance fronts are firing together, it means the people watching the radar are seeing something the official statements have not caught up with yet. The sirens are sounding again across northern Israel, and this time, they are not a drill. According to the Israeli Home Front Command, air raid alerts were activated across parts of the north, including the areas around Haifa, after missiles were detected heading toward Israeli territory. Residents were ordered into protected areas as Israeli air defense systems scrambled to respond. Reports carried by Iranian and regional outlets claimed that 4 missiles had been launched toward Haifa. The retaliation Tehran promised after Israel struck Beirut may have just arrived. Much of the detail that follows comes from Iranian state-linked channels and regional flight tracking sources rather than from major wires directly, and should be read with that in mind. But the sirens were real, the alerts were official, and the timing leaves little doubt about what is unfolding. This is exactly the scenario Tehran had been signaling for days. After Israeli airstrikes hit Beirut's southern suburbs, Iranian officials warned of a firm and painful retaliation. Now missiles are flying toward one of Israel's largest cities, and the skies over the region are emptying. An Iran air flight from Tehran to Jeddah reportedly turned back toward an airport inside Iran, instead of continuing to Saudi Arabia. A separate flight from Tehran to Istanbul made a mid-air U-turn. Qatar issued a notice restricting parts of its airspace through June 14th and rerouting aircraft. The Dutch carrier KLM extended its suspension of flights to Israel until late July. When the airlines start turning around in mid-flight, it means the people watching the radar know something the public statements have not caught up with yet. And then came the words that escalated everything. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, declared that the United States and its regional allies are now legitimate targets, accusing Washington of giving a green light to the Israeli attack on Beirut. He said Iran's opponents only understand the language of power and warned that the hand of Iran's armed forces remains open as always. In one of the strongest statements yet, Ghalibaf said the United States and Israel are neither committed to a ceasefire nor believe in dialogue. That is the parliament speaker of Iran naming the United States itself, not just Israel, as a target. The war that Washington tried to keep contained to Israeli operations has just been redefined by Tehran as a war that includes Washington. Following Israel's latest airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs, a warning has come out of Tehran that is being read across every capital in the region. The chairman of Iran's Parliamentary Committee on National Security stated that Tehran will respond with what he described as a firm and painful retaliation. In a strongly worded statement, the senior Iranian lawmaker said, "The enemy must be disciplined and returned to its place," one of the toughest public warnings issued from Tehran since the latest escalation. And that was not the only signal. Within hours, a second claim began circulating across the region, one carrying a name every military planner in Israel recognizes. Much of what follows comes from Iranian state-linked channels and regional reporting rather than from Reuters or AP directly, and should be read with that sourcing in mind. But the signals are real, the language is escalatory, and the institutions involved are not peripheral. Iranian state-linked media claims that Qatam al-Anbiya, Iran's joint military command, has put what they call Operation True Promise 5 on standby after the Beirut strikes. Iranian authorities have not publicly announced any operational decisions, but the name carries weight. Previous operations under the True Promise label were Iran's direct retaliatory strikes against Israel. Placing a fifth iteration on standby, even as an unverified claim, sends a signal that Iran considers the Beirut strikes a trigger-level event. Whether the signal is operational or psychological depends on what comes next. But the fact that the name is circulating at all is enough to ensure Israeli planners are paying attention. Iranian state media says the Supreme National Security Council held a limited emergency session after the Beirut attack. If that reported session did take place, it would suggest the Beirut strikes are being handled at the highest level of Iran's security architecture. Reports said discussions were conducted under the concept of the unity of the resistance fronts, a principle that positions Lebanon not as a separate theater, but as part of a connected arc that includes Iran, Hezbollah, and allied groups across the region. The convening of the Council, the True Promise label, and the parliamentary warning together form a messaging architecture that prepares the Iranian public and the region for the possibility of a response. The strikes that triggered this response targeted Dahieh, a southern suburb of Beirut widely regarded as a Hezbollah stronghold. Smoke was seen rising over parts of Beirut following the attacks. Netanyahu said the operation targeted Hezbollah command centers and was carried out in response to rocket fire directed at northern Israel. The strikes took place only days after a renewed ceasefire arrangement Reuters had already described as fragile, raising questions about whether the framework can survive repeated military action by one of the parties that agreed to it. Israel says it is acting in self-defense. Iran and Hezbollah say Israel is violating the ceasefire. The strikes themselves are not disputed. The justification is, Iran has not publicly announced a strike, but its officials and state-linked media are clearly signaling readiness for one. The combination of a parliamentary warning using the words firm and painful, a True Promise designation on standby, and an emergency council session creates a posture that is designed to be read as preparation. Whether Tehran follows through or holds the threat as leverage over the diplomatic process will define the next phase. The distance between readiness and action is where the next 48 hours will be decided. Netanyahu used the moment to project dominance across every front. He said Israeli forces had eliminated 350 militants in Lebanon in the last week alone. He said they had captured Beaufort Castle and a strategic ridge nearby and uncovered underground infrastructure there. He said the IDF now holds over 60% of Gaza and aims to reach 70%. He portrayed Hezbollah as being on the run. Those are Israeli claims delivered from a podium designed to project control. The Beaufort capture is confirmed by Reuters. The 350 figure and the underground infrastructure description have not been independently documented at the same level. The capture of Beaufort Castle is significant because the position overlooks key terrain in southern Lebanon and has changed hands in previous conflicts. Netanyahu framed the operation as proof that Israel is systematically dismantling Hezbollah's military infrastructure. He said Israel would not allow fire on its territory or its communities and would act accordingly. That language, combined with the ongoing strikes on Dahieh, tells Hezbollah and Iran that the ceasefire framework is not constraining Israeli military decisions. Israel is operating inside it while acting outside its limits at the same time. Netanyahu's claim that Israel controls over 60% of Gaza positions the operation as a territorial campaign rather than a counterterrorism mission. If Israel is holding and expanding inside Gaza rather than withdrawing, the diplomatic frameworks that assume an eventual pullback lose their foundation. Netanyahu said Israel was not allowing Hamas to rearm and was eliminating senior commanders. The operation continues despite the ceasefire framework Washington had been trying to preserve. The question is whether holding territory is the same as winning a war, or whether it is the beginning of a different kind of problem. While Beirut and Tehran dominated the regional picture, a separate attack inside Israel killed one person and wounded 5 others near Kochav Yair, Reuters reported. The shootings unfolded across multiple locations, adding to the confusion and briefly raising fears of a broader coordinated attack. Police killed the suspected shooter after a brief pursuit, and later arrested a second suspect, according to Reuters. Netanyahu held a security assessment with top officials. The attack underscored that the security situation inside Israel remains volatile even as the military projects dominance on external fronts.